Hey guys, what's going on? This is Matt Jones, and you are tuned in to another episode of the Bogey Free Podcast. Um, Evan usually joins me, but our schedules just sort of didn't match up this week, so he'll be back with us next week to talk about the U.S. Open. But first, we have to get into the FedEx St. Jude Classic for this week. Um, so we're back to a par 70 course. A little over 7,200 yards. So we're really, really focused in on greens and regulation, scrambling this week. The greens are a little on the small side, so that's something to take into consideration as you start to look through and do some of your research. Um, I'm not really going to talk about this past week's tournament, just for time purposes. We'll get right into it for this week. So let's start off with the guys over $10,000. Um, so we're looking at Ricky Fowler all the way up at the top this week, and it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to fade him. I mean, tons of people are talking him up this week. He's definitely going to be chalky, just based on how he's been playing this year. I mean, there's really, really not much that you can say about his game lately. Um, what was he, runner up last week? Didn't play great at the Players, but before that, he was third at the Shell Houston Open. He had the 12th at the Arnold Palm. Like, you could just keep going all the way back to his win at the Honda. He's just been in unbelievable form. His strokes gained are better than they've ever been, pretty much across any category in his career. And again, it's he's one of my favorites. It's a guy that I like to root for. He has really good distance considering how accurate he is off the tee, which makes him just really difficult to fade. Some other guys up in that range, we're looking at Brooks Koepka, Adam Scott, Francesco Molinari, and Phil Mickelson are all above 10K this week. I mean, it's one of those weeks where it's hard to. I don't know. It just seems like it should be a little. Your ownership should be a little spread out across all these guys above 10,000. If I had to pick sort of my top three, I would go Fowler, Scott, Mickelson in that order. Just sort of regardless of ownership, like we talk about it every week, you're going to have to make a stand on these guys that are expensive because they're going to be higher owned. So if you want to play them, you got to go overweight. And if you are sort of on the fence about some of these guys, just fade them. Just outright fade them because as we saw last week, some of these sure thing guys, can miss. Rahm missed the cut. DJ missed the cut. So you were looking this past week at a lot of dead lineups because people just refuse to fade these top guys. I mean, cut equity wise, these top guys are always going to have the most equity when it comes to just straight making the cut. But I don't know. I mean, Molinari's been talked up a lot. I'm not crazy about the sample that I pulled. His greens and regulations are by far the lowest out of these 10K and up guys, and his scrambling's pretty low. I mean, he doesn't. He's sort of middle of the pack for par threes, so I don't really know. I'm leaning more towards, like I said, Fowler and Scott. Um, I just feel like Adam Scott is bound to sort of put it together, put four full rounds together, and really do pretty well and really compete here. I mean, he has the third best odds according to Vegas, so you're definitely looking at a guy who has some win equity. He does well on the par threes, the par fours, the par fives. He's a good all around golfer. So it's going to be hard for me to fade Scott this week. Phil Mickelson just refuses to miss cuts. I mean, at this point, the only way he's not playing the weekend is if he doesn't play at all, basically. I think he's like 16 or 17 in a row, something around that. And I think he's leading the tour his current consecutive cuts made. So again, these guys are tough to fade. I mean, if I have to, I'm gonna stay away from Kepka because I think that he sort of lets in some big numbers come into play, and that's something that we're not gonna be able to sort of bounce back from, because in this tournament, I think the last like 8 or 9 years, winning scores have been like 8 under, 9 under, 10 under. So if you make a couple of big numbers on this course, you're not gonna succeed. It's played over par, which is pretty rare overall for the PGA Tour courses. Most of them, with how good these guys are, end up playing uh, at least a shade under par. This has been top 10 in most difficult courses for the last couple of years, so it's definitely somewhere that you want guys that are going to be making their pars where they need to, attacking when they can, and get those birdies. But it's not going to be a real high scoring, or I guess technically low scoring week. Um, as we move down through the ranks here, and we get into the 9,000 guys, there's only 4 guys in this range this week. You're looking at Russell Henley, Billy Horschel, Daniel Berger, and Ryan Palmer. Berger won here last year, uh, and I like the guy a lot. He hasn't played in the last few weeks. He hasn't played since the Players, where he didn't perform particularly well, and he's sort of been up and down. Like Wells Fargo 36th, Shell Houston Open 5th. The event down in Mexico, he was 16th, in between missing the cut a couple of times. So he's more of a GPP play for me this week, just because of that variance that he brings in. He's obviously an incredibly talented golfer, but he brings in a miscut every once in a while to your lineup. So it's definitely something to pay attention to. Russell Henley is who I'm really focusing in on. I wrote him up this week. I expect him to be relatively low owned. As we take a look at this, he missed his last cut. Didn't play unbelievable at the Players. He was 35th. But I really like him to bounce back this week after missing that cut at the Byron Nelson, because I just think his game fits well here. And that kind of bears itself out. He was 7th here last year, missed the cut in 2014, but he was 27th in 2013. So you're looking at a guy who has played this course well before. He's in pretty good form, and he has the course fit to succeed here. His par 3 scoring is the best in the range, so he's definitely a guy that I'm sort of focused in on. And I'm not crazy about Horschel or Palmer this week. Again, when you're talking about guys 9K and up, you're gonna have, they're great golfers, obviously, and they're in positions to succeed. But I'm not gonna go crazy on them. That's what I'll say. I'll definitely have some exposure to them, just because they definitely have the pedigree and the sort of avenue for success. But I really think in a GPP, I'm going after Henley. And in cash, I might really just sort of fade this range, because I just feel like there's a wide range of outcomes here, and I'm not really willing to bring that sort of variance into my lineup. As we move down and go into the guys in the 8,000s, it's kind of more of the same. Kevin Chappell has played well recently, coming off his win. And apparently, everybody thinks that Kyle Stanley's the play. I think he's the most tagged so far this week. Again, we record on Tuesday, blah, blah, blah. So that's definitely, it's possible that changes. But I just pulled it up, and he's got 35 tags, Um, and the next guy, Phil and Molinari, have 27 apiece. So I don't know. That seems like a fade to me. And then as we move down, again, I'm really not crazy about these guys. I mean, Stuart Sink's going to make the cut again. It seems like that's basically all that he's done this year. Um, and he's performed relatively well. I mean, it's one of those things where you're not like over the moon to roster a guy like Stuart Sink, but he's got one, two, three, four top 25s out of his last six starts. And his four starts before that were 28, 27, 27, and 28. I mean, if you're gonna lock in a top 30 like that, and he's at the price that he is, only being $8,000, with a real good shot to perform at that type of a level, I think it's going to be difficult for me to fade him. Yeah, I mean, wow. Actually, now that I'm looking at this a little closer, I think that Sink is actually a pretty good play when you factor in his par three scoring a little bit. Again, for this range, it's definitely something to take into consideration. Um, and then as we move down through the sort of top of the 7,000 range, um, Steve Stricker, who if you don't really follow that closely, um, it was unbelievable. They sort of gave him a hard time. He asked for an exemption into the U.S. Open because it's in Wisconsin, which is his home state, and the USGA was like, nah, not gonna do that. So he he didn't qualify for with his world golf ranking, so he had to actually go play a 36 hole qualifier yesterday on Monday, and I believe he birdied the last hole and he ended up making it. So good for him. He's got some momentum going, and it kind of seems like he's on a little bit of a mission. I know that's narrative-y, and Evan would be yelling at me right now, but it's a thing. I mean, he's really played pretty well given his age, and he's only 7,900. He basically doesn't cost you anything, so he's definitely someone I'm considering, um, just from sort of like a steady, maybe like sprinkle him in one out of the three of my cash lineups. Um, and then you keep going down, and Charles Schwartzel and Daniel Summerhays are the next two guys up. Schwartzel, I wrote him up this week. I feel like he figured something out last week. He went from like his proximity numbers were outside of like 40 feet all season, and last week he was like just outside of 32 feet. And I know that doesn't sound like a ton, but it makes a huge difference if you are 8 feet closer to the pin. So I mean, he's definitely somebody worth considering. Um, if you watched last week, you definitely saw Daniel Summerhays. He kind of stumbled down the stretch a little bit, but he ended up with a top 10. And I mean, again, for $7,900, or I'm sorry, he's 7,800. You could definitely do a little worse than Daniel Summerhays. I mean, I always have to mention Smiley Kaufman. I think he's a little. I think Kaufman, Martin, and Kirk in this range are a little overpriced. Just looking at like their Vegas odds, and I mean their greens and regulation that doesn't really wow you. Their scrambling's okay. Like Kirk is the best scrambler out of those three, but I'm not really terribly interested in those three. And then apparently apparently Poulter is is going to be chalk this week because he's the fourth most tagged golfer right now. And I mean, I guess that there's reason for it. You know, he's a little underpriced based on his Vegas odds, but oh man, I mean, if he's going to approach like 20% ownership in some of these contests, I'm not, I don't know. I'm not seeing it. Maybe I'm crazy. which, of course, if you ask anybody that actually knows me, is certainly possible. But as I'm looking through here, I mean, I I get it a little bit. He finished sixth place here like 3 years ago. Um, so I guess he's had success at this course, and he did have that great runner-up finish at the Players. But outside of that, for the most part, he's been like 35th, 41st, 43rd. Like he's not. I don't know. He's not. I don't think he's warranting the ownership that he's going to end up seeing for me. I'll definitely sprinkle him in a little bit, but he's not going to be one of my core plays whatsoever. Um, and then as we keep moving through, uh, the Alex Jankowski, the guy that I send the DK write ups to, was cracking up because I wrote up Matt Jones today. Not me, but in the sample that I pulled, he's up at like 67% greens in regulation. His proximity numbers are great. His scrambling is average, but good enough for this range. He has a little bit of distance. He's just a shade under 300 yards off the tee, and he's got good accuracy off the tee. So I'm confused at this price. Vegas doesn't like him either, but for whatever reason, he's popping in a lot of the models that I put together. So he's definitely somebody that I'm considering. And then along with Kevin Tway, another guy who we've been on a lot lately, and he missed the cut last week, which of course is going to happen in golf. There's no way these guys make every single cut, unless maybe you're like Phil Mickelson or whatever this year. But in 4 of his last 5 starts before that missed cut, he's finished no worse than 20th. So he's playing good golf. He's got the fit for this type of course. He's going to be good on a par 70 because he's great on par 4s. In the sample I pulled, he's over 22% birdie or better in par 4s when the average is like around 15 or 16. So he's definitely somebody that I'm looking at. And then as we keep going down, this whole range in like the low 7,000 sort of slows down a little bit for me. Patrick Rogers is definitely in consideration. I hate saying that because he hasn't played well at all really recently. Missed 3 of his last 5 cuts, and he had a 27th at the Byron Nelson, but he barely played the weekend this past week. Maybe Russell Knox figures it out. But it's been so long since he's really done a whole lot of anything that I'm pretty hesitant to do that. He played well at the RBC Heritage, but that's like one of the courses that he always does well on, and outside of that, he's just been abysmal this year. But maybe he's worth a flyer if he could put his game back together a little bit. Willie McGirt seems a little underpriced here. Just sort of looking at his Vegas odds. But then we pick right back up because Danny Lee and Peter Uihlein are definitely guys that I'm going to be playing in both cash and in GPPs because they're like criminally underpriced this week. They're both 7,200, which is the 43rd highest salary, and they have top 20 ranks for their Vegas odds of 12th for Danny Lee and 18th for Uihlein. So that's egregious. Like there's no reason for that. Danny Lee is being talked up a little bit. He's at 14 tags right now, and then of course the cat's out of the bag for Uihlein. He's got 20 tags already. He'll probably end up with more. Well, I know he'll end up with more once my article goes up, but he'll probably end up with more than that. And I mean, I don't think I care. I think I'm going to be overweight on both of those guys. And I'm going to just hope for the best because I really do believe that they're like incredibly, incredibly underpriced. Um, I I have this feeling about Hudson Swafford this week. He popped in a couple of the models that I put together when I was just sort of messing around with like different samples of what different guys have done this year. Um, I mean, you definitely can't trust him in cash. He's missed his last three cuts, but I mean, he's definitely worth a flyer because when you think about it, I mean, if he's, I don't know, I just, he's done well here before. He's got a 34th and a 29th place finish the last 2 years. So he's obviously, he's found some level of success here. And I just think he's too good of a golfer to be missing all these cuts. So he's definitely somebody I'm going to be sprinkling in um, at least a little bit. When you get down into this range, it's really, really important that you don't go overboard on a guy. It's awesome when you actually hit a guy who's like 2% owned and you have him 20%, but it's not realistic to happen enough for it to be worth it from like a value perspective. So don't go crazy, but I definitely think that Swafford's worth a little sprinkle here and there. Um, Harris English is the next guy I'm looking at. He's again a little underpriced. He's won here in the past before, which I like. Obviously, the greens and regulation recently look pretty good. The scrambling's pretty good. Um, he's just gonna have to. He's just gonna have to make some putts. I mean, he's hitting greens and he's not making birdies. Um, so if his putter runs a little hot, there's no reason why he can't perform reasonably well here. I don't think he'll win again, but he's definitely worth a look just because I think he'll make the cut. And when these guys get into the weekend, you never know what can happen. So I think he's definitely worth a couple lineups this week. Um, as we keep going through, I mean, Brandon Hagee kind of popped in some of my models, which is weird because I always sort of consider him like more of a bomber type, but his recent greens and regulation numbers have been really good. His par three is a little on the concerning side, but realistically, I mean, I guess we can stop looking at these guys for a second just to quickly talk about this, which I wanted to get Evan's thoughts on this, but you're only going to get my thoughts now, so good luck. But there's this thing in the DFS, well, PGA DFS community where like par 70s, you got to go after the par threes, has to be good at par three scoring, and realistically, like this week, the best guy in the field at par three scoring is right around 22% in the sample that I pulled, which ironically is Tom Hoagie, who I'll talk about in a second. But if it's 22% is the most for par threes, right, and there's twice as many par threes as par fives that these guys are going to play during the week, then that means that if you can score better than 44, 45% on the par fives, if you can birdie 44 to 45% of the par fives, then you're going to be getting the same exact benefit as whoever's the best at the par three scoring. So I think that it's overstated a lot. Like, and to give you context, like the max guy in par five scoring is over 60% in the sample that I pulled. So it's not unreasonable. Like 38% is the average for the field, and that includes everybody. So to just sit there and target par threes only, I think is a mistake. I think if these guys are up at least around like 15%, maybe even down to like 13%, and they can score well on the par fives, I think they're worth a look. And Hagee sort of fits that mold. He's a little under 12% for the par threes, but he's 45% on the par fives. There's no reason to just outright fade a guy because their par five or their par three is a little low and it's a par 70. I just think that's a mistake that a lot of people fall into, and you lose a lot of value when you get rid of these par five, these incredibly talented par five scorers that that don't maybe do as well on the par threes. So that's my little rant for now. The other, as we go through, I got to give a shout to Willie Wilcox, obviously, just for Evan, because I know he'd be talking about him right now. And he's not the worst play in the world this week. I mean, he's played, you can't play, you really can't play as bad as he played in the beginning of the year. But he played well at the Byron Nelson, and sort of rounded out into some form that we expect out of a guy like him. I don't think there's a chance that he wins it. But he's 51st in top 20 odds right now, and he is the 76 salary. So again, it's just one of those things where it's somebody that has that big of a discrepancy. I think it's worth noting. And then as we keep going, I wanted to talk about Jamie Lovemark, but he withdrew. So I mean, JT Poston is another guy that sort of exploded out onto the scene a little bit this year and has sort of cooled off, then sort of cooled off for a little bit. But, he hasn't really cooled off much at all. I mean, he missed the cut at the Byron Nelson. He didn't have a great showing at the Dean and DeLuca, but before that, 24, 27, 55, 14th place, 27th place, 17th place. Like, this guy's been playing good golf this year, and I think that it's definitely he's definitely worth a look. He's 6,700. The guy is literally costing you nothing. There's no reason for a guy with the odds, the Vegas odds that he has, to be that low. And it's the same thing with Nick Watney. Again, you're talking about a guy who performs, who has performed recently not the best, but that doesn't mean that these guys can't put it back together. He's made his last 3 cuts, which is great to see, and it's kind of hard to just completely fade these guys and ignore these guys at $6,700 when they have the odds of performing well in their favor. And then as we keep going, like, Luke List is definitely worth a look again this week. He sort of went through this phase where he was like just everybody's favorite play every week, and he burned people a couple weeks in a row. So I think his ownership will be a little bit down. He's got 9 tags so far on FanShare, so he's not going to be like 0.5% owned or whatever. But at 6,600, you could do a whole lot worse than that. I guess down here, you got DA points, and for whatever you want to say about the guy, he's sort of put himself into a decent position, so far this year, making some cuts and providing some value for DFS purposes. Maybe like a sprinkle, like a small sprinkle of like Boo Weekly, because he's done well here before. Has he actually? Let me just look that up real quick. Yeah, and so he's done actually very well here before. 12th place last year, 8th place the year before. He geez, I mean, he hasn't missed a cut since 2009 at this event, and he's played every year. So again, somebody that you're not going to go crazy on. He's not a core play. He's not your cash game play, but he's worth a look. Um, I feel like I saw some people on Twitter talking about Andrew Loop. I mean, he's like the Bombers' bomber, so I don't really know where that was coming from. But he's got pretty good proximity numbers in the events that he's played um, as of late, which clearly hasn't been a lot. Like he hasn't played the last couple of weeks. But even despite the fact that he's missed some cuts recently, it seems like his numbers are there. So who knows? If again, another guy, you get your putter to run hot for 4 days in a row, and you get yourself the top 15, top 10, and then it's sort of off to the races, and everybody's going to roster him, his next start. So those are the guys that I'm sort of looking at. Again, it's only Tuesday afternoon, night-ish. So definitely follow along on Twitter. You can find me at MattJonesTFR. You can also follow Evan, even though he abandoned me this week, at eChaney17. And again, I'm sorry that it was a short show this week. But we're gearing up for the U.S. Open next week. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I just need to confirm, but I'm hoping that we'll have a guest on next week again. So yeah, I mean, just make sure that you follow along on Twitter, like I said, and check out the DraftKings playbook. You can see my article, Reading the Grain. Probably by the time this comes out, it'll be up. And like Evan says, if we're not winning all the money, we definitely hope some of you guys are. So follow us during the rest of the week leading up to the tournament, and good luck.